Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of the Opening Bell. Lots to chew through and digest this week from the world of boxing. We had some fantastic action from last weekend, both stateside with the lightweight division starting to take shape, from Ireland where there was pulsating drama all the way. And we kick on again this weekend as well with Troy Williamson Simpson, belated rematch there, and Callum Walsh against Tyler Denny. Aaron McKenna back in action after something of a hiatus and a career best performance from him. The Golden Boy makes an appearance on This Week in History as we delve into the early part of Oscar De La Hoya's career as he moves from super featherweight up to lightweight. There's loads of news lines as well, particularly concerning the heavyweight division. Welcome to the show once again, my cohort, colleague, friend, and ally, Mr. Matt Christie. How are you?
Sensational. Absolutely sensational today. How are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. For those that are listening, not watching via YouTube, I'm wearing another retro top. This time it's late 80s, turn of the 90s, Lazio. Have a look at this little beauty. Big collar, Italian badge on. I went a bit daft, splurging on some retro tops during the World Cup, and this is one of them. I had Roma on last week. Let's even things. Oh, it's not Lazio. It's Napoli. Sorry, Napoli. It's Maradona. Late 80s, 90s.
Have you got a Lazio one after all that?
No, I don't. so I don't even. Sorry.
I don't even know what you're wearing, you child.
Oh, dear. I've got other news that was foisted upon me this week by Mrs. Steed. So I've got something I need to ask you. I'm like, all right, here we go. Wasn't really expecting drama, but anyway, we don't have much of that in our life. She said, I want to get a puppy. So it was inevitable. I was hoping we were going to have another year without a dog, so we're just absolutely free. If you want to go away, don't have to rely on other people. So it is about a year since we lost our old champion, Rupert. He was a star. What a legend he was. So it's a bit earlier than I was expecting. But once those wheels are in motion, mate, you know the score. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know why she even asked, because there's only one answer, isn't there, that you can give to that one. So the path is open, the road is set, the future is clear. The puppy's been born in a litter of, I don't know how many actually, I think it's about 8 of them. So we're going to have one of the little boys. The current state of affairs is the largest one with the red collar on, but TBC.
What type of dog is it?
Black lab.
Oh, nice. Rocky's
it's like going back in time.
Black labs.
My very first dog was a black lab way back when. Remember, we got it for Christmas when I was about, what age would I have been? About 6 or 7, I think. Lucky. Black lab lady. She was a star. She was a star. So yeah, we're going back in time, but that's what the future looks like. Early September, we'll be arriving. Current favourite for a name? Bruce. But we know the Opening Bell crew are so good. Bruce or Angus is the current favourite. But if you want to send some suggestions, OB faithful, please do. At Opening Bell on the socials, the Opening Bell podcast at gmail.com. Get in touch. Send me some names and we'll put them through the mincer.
About turkey, have you considered turkey?
Yeah. Frank, Eddie. Yeah. Oscar, Sugar, Ray, Leonard. Yeah, all in the hat. But yeah, boxing ones would be fine. Now, I said there was going to be some heavyweight news lines. One of those will be confirmed a bit later on, and that may well be to do with the shape of what happens with the IBF, and maybe what it'll mean when Moses and Ergovich meet on August the 29th. What was the landscape? What's the current situation with the belts with the IBF there, Matt?
Well, the IBF had ordered a bout between number 1 contender Frank Sanchez and number 3 contender Moses. And I believe that negotiations have been going on with all parties, and all will be revealed today that I think will probably please a lot of people. I think the three fighters involved, as in Itauma, Hrgović and Sanchez, will probably be pleased with the outcome, both from an opportunity point of view and a financial one. I think one of the fighters probably will be earning quite handsomely just to sit and wait. But yes, suffice to say that come August the 29th, Queensberry Promotions will be in charge of 3 of the 4 heavyweight belt holders, and that stranglehold on the division that we've spoken of in the past for Frank Warren's Queensberry is really gathering pace in 2026.
Okay, so that's on August 29th. Could be good news for Moses and Hrgović, and the winner of that one. And Frank Sanchez is sort of watching on interestedly as well. As regards Fury AJ, grumblings behind the scenes. I think we sort of suspected this, Matt, that it wouldn't take place in the UK. I think one of those fighters was more concerned about that than the other, is our understanding. And Joshua was quite outspoken about wanting the fight to be in the UK. Turkey Al-Sheikh had said he did it at the same time or around the same time. But I think the timings of that fight going out to an international audience was making that difficult. The curfew of Wembley was making that difficult. So it sounds like it could be going stateside.
That would appear to be the case as we record on Tuesday, the 4th of August, 2026. I spoke to quite a few people in the last week that are either involved in negotiations or know what's going on in negotiations, and New York is pretty much nailed on now as the destination. And there's a part of me that really wonders if Wembley was ever really part of the equation, particularly with this chat saying, yes, well, okay, we'll have it at Wembley, but it has to start at 2 or 3 a.m. Turkey Al-Sheikh posted something, didn't he, a few weeks ago saying, I'm hoping to get good news today from the London mayor about a request to stage it at that point of the night. But yet councils in London are saying they haven't actually had any official request at all. So how hard they tried to get it in Wembley, I don't know. Frankly, putting it on at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning at Wembley, to me, would have been stupid. I'd rather have seen it in New York, frankly, than in the middle of the night at Wembley Stadium. And it does appear now that New York is where it'll be. I completely understand British fans' annoyance at this. And I think the most telling thing is an awful lot of the more vocal US fans are also more or less saying, we don't really want it. The UK fans should have it. It's not as big a fight in the US as it will be here. However, if you give me the choice of Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Saudi Arabia, or New York, I'd say New York all day long. There is something still very, very romantic about a heavyweight fight in the center of New York. And it does appear that that is where it's going to take place. Ultimately, you have got Turkey Al-Sheikh pulling the strings behind the scenes. You also have Netflix on a hanging on to an awful lot of those strings as well. They believe, and they have looked at their analytics, they have looked at their subscriber base, and they have come to the conclusion that the fight has to start at peak time in the US to get the biggest audience. They know how many US subscribers they've got. They know how many US subscribers have watched the boxing events so far. They know how many UK fans have watched the boxing events so far. And that is the decision they've come to. One would probably think they know what they're doing, but from a UK hardcore point of view, it's a kick in the balls to have the fight over there. But there's other people making these decisions. Ultimately, what could have happened if both fighters wanted it in the UK, or even one of them was that desperate for it to be in the UK, they could have turned around and said, I'm not fighting unless it's in the UK. Nobody's forcing them to go out to America. They could have turned around and said, okay, maybe out of that 100 odd million I'm getting, maybe I could take 10 million off and we'll do it in the UK. Neither of them were willing to do that. And I'm not going to sit here and blame them for that. This is probably the last time that they'll earn this kind of cash. So I'm not going to blame them for any of that. But ultimately, although we can sit here and say, well, it's Turkey's fault or it's Netflix's fault, with every fight that occurs in the sport of boxing, the boxers have an awful lot of power, far more than people suggest. They're not being forced to go over to America and have the fight over there. They could have had it in the UK if they'd have come to the right agreement.
So ultimately, when this news is broken and there's going to be politicking and he said, they said, oh, this is out of our hands, etc., the fighters absolutely have to claim at least some personal responsibility. How much then beyond that is it simply practicalities, or is it all really about money, one way or another, when you break it down?
Predominantly, it's about money. You know, it's not going to make any money. This event won't make any money wherever they put it in the world, given the amount that both fighters have demanded and agreed to. But you know, New York is New York, isn't it? It's not a million miles away. I'm sure there will be a certain amount of British fans that will be thinking, oh yes, an excuse to fly out to New York. We'll make a week of it. But it is a ludicrously expensive city as well, by the same token. So it's going to be an expensive trip. Joshua's only fought out there once, and he had the disaster against Andrew Ruiz. And I saw overnight his former trainer, Robert Garcia, has been quite vocal about Joshua's state of mind in recent days, saying he'd be concerned about that for Joshua, who thinks and overthinks that he has to return to New York, which is the place where he suffered the most humbling defeat of his career. But sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say interesting that, because I think there's going to be a Joshua Netflix doc, isn't there? And I believe Garcia is one of the few people who's turned down the opportunity to speak in that. But anyway, that maybe that's an aside. Maybe it's
yeah. I mean, Garcia essentially said he didn't want to do it because he was fearful that he wouldn't be allowed to be honest. I mean, he spent several months with Joshua, and I think what he's alluding to is a weakness psychologically with Joshua. From Joshua's point of view, Joshua may have changed immeasurably since those two were together. He may have worked on certain things that Garcia believes were ingrained forever. So we don't know. We don't know the ins and outs of that fallout. No. So, you know, until you hear both sides of the story, it's always good just to err on the side of caution before siding with the only one you can hear.
Yeah, indeed. Tio Lopez has signed a multi-fight deal with DAZN. We've got sort of two examples in sort of news lines at the moment, Matt, about sort of good business, bad business, good businessman, bad businessman, maybe some sensible work that's going to be profitable, and some decision making that might turn out to be not so. In contrast with Tio linking up with DAZN, makes you wonder why more fighters don't sign deals with broadcasters rather than promoters, in truth, doesn't it, Matt? And then you've got Keyshawn Davis, who one way or another has probably absolutely bungled the negotiations with Devin Haney one way or another. So much so, I think he just pulled out of the purse bids, which were lower than the offer that Top Rank had made him anyway. So some curious, from a guy who's called the businessman, curious decision-making there, I think, stateside.
It is really. I mean, on the one hand, given that we see and hear kind of reported fees for fighters in certain fights, and Keyshawn Davis no doubt thinks a fight against Devin Haney should be right up there in terms of purses. And he was initially offered, or so I'm led to believe, he was initially offered $3 million, turned it down, went to purse bids, which meant that his share of the purse, which was 25% of the purse, would actually work out at $2 million, has walked away from the fight. And I think the WBO have turned around and now punished him by ranking him at number 7 or 8 in their latest rankings, and that's their slap on the wrist. On the one hand, as a fighter who goes in the ring and has got to a certain level and expects to earn what he believes those at a similar level are earning, I can understand why he might be thinking that that's not quite enough to fight someone like Devin Haney, which with Haney involved, it's going to be a big fight. On the other, at the age of 27, though Keyshawn has exhibited an awful lot of promise, and although he has kind of beaten kind of lower level top 10 guys, he hasn't yet proven himself in the way that Devin Haney has. So there comes a point where you do have to gamble on yourself. And there's almost this, because if he beats Devin Haney, his purse for his next fight could well be 6 or 7 million. And I think there comes a point in a fighter's career, and I believe Keyshawn Davis is at it now, where you do have to gamble on yourself. You have to have that belief in yourself. That what it smacks of a little bit, I'm not saying this is the case, is, or it can invite criticism that would suggest that Davis is essentially saying that this might be the biggest payday of his career. He may never get another opportunity like this, but all he's got to do in there is win. And then he walks into his next fight with a significantly higher sum. So I think as a fighter, perhaps at this point, and while pocketing 3 million, you gamble on yourself. So I think it's a little bit disappointing. I can understand the criticism, but again, from the fighter's point of view, they want to earn as much as they possibly can in this world where inflated purses are rife.
And it's not just Turkey, isn't it? That's what makes me think. It's not just the Saudi money more recently. It's kind of, certainly stateside. He's probably more so been a sort of PBC Al Heyman influenced thing, hasn't it? Where you had guys like the Charlo brothers, earning millions and millions and millions at a relatively early stage for being nominal champions rather than necessarily being bona fide stars. And at the moment, Keyshawn Davies is a sort of nominal champion, a would-be champion, rather than a bona fide star. So it really says something about the landscape of pay structures, I think, stateside. And that's not just a Saudi thing now, even although that casts a shadow across the world elsewhere. So we'll follow that, see how it pans out, and whether it means that fight falls through the gap or not. A couple of others. See Tete coming back after his 4-year ban. He's going to resume boxing at the age of 38. He's one of the few guys who did get properly punished for doping, interestingly. And Matchroom and MVP kind of linking up. MVP have been making some moves in the last week or so, haven't they? Because they're signing on with the PFL, the sort of MMA sort of Premier League, if you like. So maybe they're sort of throwing the hat into the ring against the UFC, but they're linking up with Matchroom on the women's side of boxing, which is mainly where they're concentrating. So a couple of angles and a couple of darts from Jake Paul and his team.
Interested that MVP are kind of linking up and inviting assistance from other organisations. I think the MMA link up is interesting, and I know that they haven't linked up with Matchroom to have anything to do with MMA, but you look at, and this is something Tris Dixon pointed out, you look at what Eddie Hearn is doing with certain fighters from MMA, and you do wonder if something is being kind of constructed behind the scenes to essentially go head to head with the UFC. But in terms of the women's code, on the surface, you'd think it is a tremendous idea that you can have someone like Matchroom who have a lot of expertise with that side of the business, working with MVP, who have a tremendous roster, the best roster in women's boxing at the moment. And then there's a part of you, the cynic part of you, thinks, is this because you haven't been able to make it work on your own? Do we need to work together in order to get this to where we want to be? Because MVP have thrown an awful lot of money at it. They've signed an awful lot of fighters. They've staged bills where it is generally women only on the bill. If that was really flourishing for them, one would think that they would want that pie all to themselves. So you do wonder if behind the scenes certain sums have been done and they realise that working together is the way forward on that.
And just taking a sort of link into the women's side of the sport, Caroline Dubois leaving Shane McGuigan. Not many have left that gym and then gone on to prosper, have they necessarily? Although timing would play a part in that.
No, and she was quite quick. I mean, the news broke, I think, last week, and then she was quite quick afterwards to say that, she will always respect Shane McGuigan. She is not dispensing with the teaching of Shane McGuigan. The way she described it, it reminded me almost of somebody that's going through their education at university. What they learned in the first 2 years at university was exceptionally important, and that has given them a really good grounding. Now they'll go on to the next level, and they will add different skill sets that is required to be the fighter that she wants to be. So off she goes. I think is it Abel Sanchez she's going off to join? I might be wrong on that. But anyway, she's going to someone of that ilk. But she was very, very quick to say there's been no problem, no arguments, no ill feeling at all with Shane McGuigan, because Shane McGuigan was with Caroline from 20, I can't remember what year it was, but it was a year before she turned professional. And they've come an awfully long way together.
Indeed they have. Indeed they have. And finally, as Trevor McDonald used to say, so I donate every month to the Ringside Charitable Trust. I hope if you have a fiver or a tenner or a few quid that you could do so as well. The ringsidecharitabletrust.com is the website address. You can go and have a look at what it is that they do. Still Dave Harrison and his team. Matt is on the board of trustees at the RCT, and they are closing in on opening this retirement home. That is getting ever closer. But one of the things, which I must admit I wasn't aware of until Dave Harris texted me this week, I wasn't aware actually that as a regular contributor, you go into their sort of monthly lottery. And Dave texted me this week to say that my name had come out of the hat and that I had won a £100 monthly lottery winning ticket. So I did say to Dave, mate, put it back in the kitty. Don't worry about that. Put it back in. And he said, no, you should go and have a bet with it, which then got me thinking, perfect. Let's have an OB boxing bet with 100 quid, whether it's 100 quid on one bet or 240s and a 20 quid double or 250 singles or whatever it is. But let's put that £100 bet to a bet. And hopefully we can make a few quid for the Ringside Charitable Trust. So I don't know if it's going to be this week. Sort of tempted by Tyler Denny at 9-2. I think if he turns up in the same mood against Callum Walsh as he did against George Liddard, then not only do I think Tyler Denny's live at 9-2, I actually think he'll win at 9-2. But there is a doubt about that at his age. And, you know, Walsh going home, he's quite busy, fast-handed. So I'm probably going to swerve it this week. But Matt will be putting our thinking caps on for that to try and make a few quid for the Ringside Charitable Trust.
Yeah, hopefully we will. Hopefully we will.
So doubtful. But do you want to tell the listeners?
I'm just acutely aware of our checkered history with calling fights. Before we move on, Caroline Dubois will be joining the Manny Robles team. Manny Robles. Well, I know it was tight and we were finding it difficult, but we did pick Zepeda at the weekend. Yeah.
Who was second favourite in a match, in a two-horse race.
Yeah.
So ye of little faith. Can I read the text that you sent me about your speculative bet?
Depends which one it is. Oh, yes, you can read that one, yeah.
The accumulator.
Yeah, go for it.
So when I told Matt about the 100 quid and my idea to have a bet, he said, let's do an accumulator. Joshua to chin Fury inside 90 seconds. Ben to flatten Garcia inside 3 rounds. And Ergovic to thrash Itauma inside 5. Let's get the most bang for our buck, he said. and I replied, morally bankrupt, absolutely no. Smiling emoji. So we'll leave it. We'll get on with it. I'll tell you what, we wouldn't have punted Mark Chamberlain to beat Pierce O'Leary, I don't think. We were both of the opinion that Chamberlain would make it interesting, would make it a fight, and had a chance, but we fancied Pierce O'Leary. What a fight. I think this is one of the best fights, or the fights I've most enjoyed in quite some time. I thought it was spectacular. I didn't watch it live on the night. We were round Matt at some friends for dinner, so I watched it on Sunday. I still got all the brutality, the brilliance, the courage, the sway one way and another. I got all of that as if I was watching it live. I thought it was a tremendous fight. What an effort from both men, and a special performance from Chamberlain.
Were you aware of the result when you watched it?
No, I managed to avoid it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which, you know, I don't think I would have got the same out of it had I not. But yeah, no, I managed to avoid. I just kept away from socials and news until I was able to sit down on Sunday and watch it. Whew, what a fight. What a fight. I mean, it couldn't have gone any better for Chamberlain through the first 3 rounds. How then, I mean, he's 5 points up, isn't he, after 3 rounds? How O'Leary then managed to come back in the fourth and fifth. Then again in the sixth, it's a dominant round from Chamberlain. Then O'Leary comes back again and probably wins, squeakers a couple, but he probably wins the next 3 rounds. 8 and 9 are disputable, but he puts Chamberlain down in the second. I mean, it was seesaw one way or another. And, you would have thought that O'Leary was going to turn it around. And then suddenly Chamberlain gets back on it and the long, heavy shots, and he picked his moment. And talk about fighter's instinct, Matt. That fighter's instinct to know when you've hurt your opponent, because it wasn't that obvious when he just clipped him with that left hand. I thought I'd seen it live, but I didn't see it as quickly as Chamberlain saw it, and he was right onto him. And then it was jab, uppercut, and then it just started to unfold.
It's a stunning fight from start to finish. I didn't think Chamberlain had that in him, I'll be honest. But it shows you how you can just kind of go from championing someone like Mark Chamberlain, like we used to then thinking, oh no, he hasn't got it, because he lost a fight on a 10-round points decision to someone like Josh Padley. So therefore he's written off. We're all guilty of doing it. You look back on it now, and this should have been a 50-50 fight going in. We should have been saying that Chamberlain was a really strong underdog. Talk about someone who has the psychological stuff, as you would say, the stuff, and that is Mark Chamberlain. And it oozes from him when he's in the ring. You can hear it in his voice with everything that he's saying, whether he's being interviewed pre-fight or post-fight. There's a certain intelligence and wiseness to Mark Chamberlain that I hold my hands up. I just ignored that and written it off because P.S. O'Leary was the man with the momentum, and purely because Mark Chamberlain had lost a fight over 10 rounds. And a fight of which I know very little about the build-up or what was going on with Mark Chamberlain in the build-up to that. So yeah, full credit to Mark Chamberlain. Full credit also to P.S. O'Leary. Because after the first half of that fight, you're thinking there's only one winner. We know that P.S. O'Leary's got a history of coming on strong in the second half of fights, but the dominance for Chamberlain was so pronounced at that point, you thought that Chamberlain was simply going to continue to do what he was doing. And O'Leary, who must have felt like someone had taken a hammer to his face, goodness knows how these people keep going forward with the kind of injury that we can all see, and we can only really imagine. The canvas is stained red. Each of the fighters' shorts are stained red. There's claret splattering everywhere with shots that are being landed. And O'Leary works himself back into that contest. He lands the sweetest of body shots. And when you see fighters go down from a body shot like that, it isn't often that, number one, they get up, and number two, they're competitive again. That can very often spell the end, particularly in a difficult fight, particularly in a grueling fight. But Chamberlain managed to not necessarily come back into it straight away, but he managed to regain a foothold of sorts, so that he was competitive. But I must say, going into the round where O'Leary's knocked out, I didn't see that coming at all. You're starting to tot up the round totals in your head, thinking how the judge is going to have this. Which way is this going to go? Keep in mind it's in Dublin, so how are they going to see it? How are they going to react to the cheers? Because the cheers for O'Leary coming back into it were far louder than what was occurring in the early rounds when Chamberlain was in the ascendancy. So you're starting to have all of that going on in your head, and all of a sudden, Chamberlain, the man who had the wind knocked out of him after perhaps exerting a lot, perhaps too much energy in the first half of the fight, is now the one who can come again and land the finishing blows to win the fight, to remind everyone what a fighter he is. Both of them reminded us what a sport boxing is. I think there's an awful lot of negativity at the moment around with the sport of boxing, and I would hope that the people that listen to this know that I would probably agree with a lot of that criticism. However, when you see fights like that, you just have to take a bow to these warriors that can produce contests like that. One of the best fights that I've seen this year. It really, really was. And, you know, they're talking about a rematch. Let them both have a rest for a while before we go into a rematch. But it's most certainly a rematch that I'd like to see.
It was awe-inspiring, mind-boggling. It was just incredible, wasn't it, from start to finish? And it had the momentum swings. It had the heroism. It just had absolutely everything, this fight, didn't it? And once again, it just makes you so in awe of these men and women who are able to do what they do time and time again. Chamberlain coming back off a near year-long break out of the ring against a guy who's flying right now, but sparkling on the night, boxing out of his skin. And then O'Leary finding a way through a nose that looked broken and bloodied and hurt and damaged and repeatedly being even more inflicted upon, seemingly finding a way to turn the fight his way. So much so that the commentary were calling it. I think they were echoing what we were thinking watching from home or watching in the stands. And that was tight fight. I agreed with Frampton. I thought it was level going into the 10th. A couple of disputed rounds maybe in 4, 8 and 9. But otherwise, it was a close fight. It was a competitive fight. It was a thrilling fight. And it looked one that O'Leary was just starting to turn in his direction. It looked like the power wasn't what it was from Chamberlain early on in the fight. And then suddenly he picked his spot, as he had done so often and so repeatedly. Those big long arms of his, he got his tactics bang on. He looks such a long-armed wicked puncher when he puts it together without necessarily loading up, despite being a bit flat-footed. But his judgment of distance, his timing, so sharp, so spot on, wildly impressive. And to answer the absence, Matt, and then to answer the gut check, literally and physically, and then to come out on top. I mean, take a bow, but please, both men, take a rest. And Matt, let me ask you this, because when I'm watching it through the first half of the fight, I'm thinking Chamberlain's exposing some of the potential weaknesses in Pierce O'Leary's game plan. I know he was so on point, but O'Leary was damned if he did and damned if he didn't, because if he stayed at that sort of off range, he was just getting picked off. When he tried to come forward, Chamberlain was either meeting him as he came forward, or he was taking a half step forward. It was either long left hand or it was the uppercut. He was just creating that little bit of space. The knockdown, he didn't even step back. He just met him as he was coming forward, and he used O'Leary's own weight and challenge to inflict even more damage. So it was so hard for him. And I'm just thinking, there's nothing O'Leary can do here. There's nothing. Because he just can't get his feet quick enough to get close enough. If he stays on the outside, he'd get picked off. What does he do? Well, eventually he found a way to get a little closer, and it looks like he was turning his way. But is that a red flag for him, or did you take enough in terms of him working something out as that fight went along? What did you think?
I think it's a little bit of both with a fighter like Pierce O'Leary, and I think we've said this before about Lewis Crocker kind of springs to mind, and I'm not saying that they're the same kind of fighter necessarily, but I think when you have been through tough fights before and you're conditioned to eventually getting on top, you can be a little bit haphazard with your approach because you have become too conditioned to the fact that you're going to win. Doesn't matter if I make mistakes because I always get there in the end. And there was a little bit of that with Pierce O'Leary in the early rounds. But when he did tighten up a touch, then he started to have success. And I think that provided O'Leary isn't rushed back, I I think that will be, and there's no disgrace in losing a fight like that. No disgrace whatsoever, particularly given the way, as you say, from an unwinnable position, he turned it back into a winnable position for himself. And he looked like the likeliest winner for me going into those last few rounds. So the fact that he did that should give him the encouragement. He doesn't need to dwell on the result too much. There's a lot there to build on with Piers O'Leary. Not saying this guy is going to go on and rule the world. I'm not saying that. But there is still room for improvement in there. And when there's room for improvement and there's a bit of a runway in front of you, then yeah, all good. Mark Chamberlain, as we said, or I said, look, I'd written him off because he lost the fight. Let's not do the same to Piers O'Leary.
And actually, we'll return to this, but O'Leary could just look across the pond to what happened with William Zepeda against Lamont Roach, couldn't he? Because we did see, first of all, like Mark Chamberlain, Zepeda had a good chunk of time out since he lost to Shakur. No disgrace there. But we did see a battery charged, refreshed Zepeda. I think that was part of the story. But I think more significant and more important for O'Leary to learn the lessons, because similar styles, not the same, similar styles, they're pressure fighters. I think Zepeda has probably got a better defense and a better slide foot approach into range rather than O'Leary, who might explode. I think Zepeda is a bit better at that. But what we saw from Zepeda at the weekend, Matt, was just little subtle developments. There was just a little in the early rounds, press, quarter step back counters. Hadn't seen that from him before. It's only fifth, sixth gear forward. And then we saw a lot of jabbing up and down, head and body. And as the fight went on, that's what won him the fight. So little subtle differences. We wouldn't have thought that before from Zepeda, who we thought was one-dimensional. You could say, in a sense, O'Leary has been one-dimensional, in a sense, but he only looks to look at what Zepeda was doing at the weekend to see you can fine-tune, you can slightly change your approach in your game while still harnessing most of the stuff that made you what you are. Because Zepeda was really good at the weekend. Probably aided and abetted a tiny bit, we must say, by Roach's own limitations.
I think Roach went into that full of confidence. And I think that he had seen the same Zepeda that the vast majority of people had seen. And I think he thought he'd be too cute, he'd be too clever. There was certain approach plays that Zepeda used to do where he just had the moves already planned and thought, well, they're in my locker. All I've got to do is this. And I'm going to win the fight. And he didn't. And he admitted afterwards, and full credit to Lamont Roach in the aftermath for saying that I thought this would be an easy night, and it wasn't. Zepeda's so much better than I thought he'd be. You don't always hear that. Sometimes you hear it several years later. You don't always hear it on the night when your pride is at its most bruised, because it would have been. He'd just been convincingly beaten by a fighter that he thought he was going to defeat himself. Roach, I think, was a little bit too reliant on Zepeda creating the openings so that Roach would then counter. And those openings never really came. And while Roach is waiting for the openings to come, Zepeda is just hacking away at him. I thought it was a really measured and controlled performance, particularly by what we've seen from Zepeda in the past. And I also think it showed us about Shakur Stevenson, who although he had a tough fight against Zepeda, he was in control. He was the boss. And that should remind us all how good Stevenson is. But then you say that. I would probably say that the Zepeda that fought Shakur was different to the Zepeda that fought Lamont Roach at the weekend. It was one who had taken on board things that he'd learned from when he lost the fight. But yeah, you feel for Lamont Roach. You feel for Lamont Roach because you feel he should have had that moment when he fought Gervonta Davis. For me, he deserved to win that fight, and that would have been a stunning upset. And it's going to be tough now, given that, okay, that was a draw against Tank Davis. Then he had the draw against Pitbull. Now he's had the loss. It's getting longer and longer since he last actually won a fight. You can get out of the habit of winning a fight. You can psychologically start to think, oh no, this isn't going to be another one, is it? And it can just build and build and build. So Lamont Roach, lovely guy, great family, great team. But you do wonder now what's next for him, and if there are some kind of psychological obstacles he's going to have to get over. He hasn't turned into a bad fighter overnight, but I believe he fought the wrong fight against Zepeda. For Zepeda now, the sky's the limit again, isn't it?
It is. It is. Who would you fancy Zepeda against Murataya? Murataya, who really showed Conceição his age, didn't he? I mean, Conceição he tried pretty much everything he knew, but you could see it on his face, same as you could see on Roach's face, that it was getting harder and harder, and neither of them really could find a way to turn things their way. Zepeda going forward a little more intelligently against Murataya, who can really sort of fight well inside or just outside range. So that'd be a fascinating matchup, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. It would. And you look at those three, really, you'd have to say that it's Murataya, it's Abdullah Mason and Zepeda that are the top three in that division. And I'd probably pick Murataya. I'd probably, if they did make Zepeda against Murataya, I'd probably pick him, to be honest. But I don't know. That would be a terrific fight, wouldn't it? That would be a terrific fight.
It's a good one. It's mad, isn't it? Because I think last week, well, I don't know. Actually, you were a bit sceptical about Murataya, weren't you? I was a bit more positive about him regarding his fight against Conceição. I didn't think he was so one-sided, but I thought he'd win it comfy.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I don't remember actually. My memory is I said that this is another kind of fight that he needs to further his education. I don't recall if I thought it'd be close or whatever else, but that was my point about that fight, is that because he has won a title kind of as fighters can in this day and age when there's so many titles to aim at, they can all of a sudden be a world champion without fighting the world's best. So they're kind of still learning on the job when they've got that belt around their waist. I think that was the point. But if that is the case with Murataya, then he has proven that he is getting better and better with that world title around his waist.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in what we saw at the weekend, they've both got the style to beat each other. I think if it's Zepeda's kind of fight, I just think Zepeda does that stuff in and around range a little better than Murataya. I think Murataya is a bit more technical. He lives the life. I think he's getting better and better and better. I think he's a tough night's work for everyone, and he can find gaps. So he can definitely beat Zepeda. I think the version of Zepeda we saw at the weekend, I'd fancy him just to be a little too strong for Murataya, but that's a fascinating matchup. I like that.
It is a fascinating one, and I think that Murataya perhaps now, in order to really discover if someone is extra special or not, because not everybody that has a world title wrapped around their waist is extra special. I don't mean any disrespect to anybody there, but Murataya is one of those guys that we're looking at to kind of move forward and become someone who's in all the pound for pound list. There's that kind of air about him, is that they need that fight against someone like a Zepeda to show us whether or not they have got the A-list gold dust or not.
And who would you pick? Pierce O'Leary, Chamberlain in a rematch?
Probably Chamberlain. Probably Chamberlain. But not. I wouldn't want anybody to take my word for that. Let's put it that way. But I think yeah. Chamberlain showed at the very end, at the start, that he is probably a little more versatile at this stage than his opponent. I also think that even though O'Leary is as tough as they come, there is always something at the back of your mind going, this guy did this to me before, he beat me like this before, and there's certain psychological hurdles that you need to overcome as well. So I would just about lean towards Mark Chamberlain in a rematch.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it for a few days, and I don't really know the answer, but luckily we don't have to think about it too much in the short term. But I think the keys are, you have to say things couldn't have gone, largely on balance, couldn't have gone any better for Chamberlain, and they almost couldn't have gone any worse for O'Leary. So it depends how much of a painful but crucial lesson boxing and life lesson that was for Pierce O'Leary, because it could be the best for him. It really could be the best. So it just depends how much he really learns from that. Same way Zepeda, slightly humbled against Shakur. He's really used that, and he used the break. So that, I think that's in play. But on the evidence of what we saw Chamberlain the other night, I mean, he was absolutely tremendous. So I'd be intrigued to see how the bookies would price that one up, and whether he'd get it at Fratton Park or back in Portsmouth as well. You'd say he's probably deserved it, hasn't he? Chamberlain. All of that was at the weekend. And Barney Smith probably got a useful 10 rounds against veteran Rhys Bellotti, didn't he? He sparkled in little cameos. I wonder what the takeouts will be for him and his team. Maybe punch more in bunches, combinations, because a single, fast, eye-catching single shot score, he's dynamite, isn't he, the kid?
When he lets his hands go, he kind of lives up to the hyperbole that was being spouted by certain members of the analyst crew and commentary team beforehand, in that he's the best up-and-coming British fighter that we've got. But I still think that he has an awful lot of the ingredients, but we need to see more from him. I think he was too comfortable to be inviting Bellotti onto him, where you could actually invite disaster against the wrong sort of opponent there. But he is very comfortable in his own skin. He does have an awful lot of talent. So yeah, we see what happens next. He's coming along nicely. No need to rush.
Yeah, and he's only young as well, just a baby, isn't he? He's just a baby. Nice nickname, nice initials as well, RBS. I think that can work further down the line. I think they can sell that. Big shout out to NAS Medical, our sponsors on the opening bell. Thanks to Neil and his team. They're the leading independent experts in ringside medical care. They provide global medical coverage for professional and amateur boxing events, ringside medicine training and basic life support accredited courses. Boxer safety, their priority. You can find Neil and the team at nasmedical.co.uk. Thanks to them. Thanks to the Patreons, you lovely people, the Apple Plus subscribers. And if you want ad-free content each and every week, then you can sign up for that for less than £5 a month. £5 each month is all that it takes. Let's move on to this week, Matthew. This weekend, Troy Williamson Simpson, belatedly, they're going to get into the ring. Troy now at the age of 34. Simpson's the bookies' favourites once again, which, given what happened in December, seems a bit of a stretch. But learning from defeat, could that be the motif for this one?
It's a tricky fight to call, in all honesty. You've got Callum Simpson, who prior to that fight with Troy Williamson was being spoken of as, someone who could become something of a Ricky Hatton type figure in this country, given the support that he generates, given his perceived ability in the ring, given his explosiveness and punching power and everything else. And then it all went wrong against Troy Williamson, who is in something of a renaissance period in his career. Troy Williamson has been vocal about the lack of opportunities he's had since he fought Callum Simpson first time round. Callum Wilson, crikey, he's just left West Ham. Anyway, since he fought Callum Simpson last time round.
To be fair, Callum Wilson looks like he could probably punch as well. He looks like he could scrap.
Yeah, he'd have done. I think he'd have done a job for West Ham in the Championship, to be honest. But anyway, I digress. So I think they've both got an awful lot to prove. I think Callum Simpson's career is riding on it, but I think that Troy Williamson has got his whole career kind of build into this moment, just to almost stick his finger up to the industry and go, right, now give me what I deserve. Now give me the plaudits that I deserve. I'd be going Williamson again. I would be going Williamson again if I absolutely had to, given everything that we saw in that first fight. Because what we see, that wasn't necessarily, in my opinion, Simpson having just purely a bad night at the office. A lot of what went wrong for him was going wrong for him in previous fights, but he'd managed to correct it against lesser opponents. So I'm not saying his whole style needs an overhaul, and I dare say they have gone back to square one, ripped up the game plan from the first fight, and have been coming up with different approaches for the second. But if I was forced to make a pick, I would go for Troy Williamson. Do not put a penny of the Ring Charitable Trust money on this one. I think with that, we need to go sensible. Need to go sensible, and £100 can become £250, as opposed to trying to get £100 into 10,000. Like I was saying, very much with my tongue wedged in my cheek earlier on with the text message.
I was just thinking, someone has changed their tune.
You surely knew that I wasn't being serious with that. You of all people.
I did, you crafty joker. I did. I was actually just the more you were talking, the more I was just thinking, I think Troy Williamson's a bet this weekend at 11-8 as it happens. I think I agree with you. I think if Simpson can go back to that sort of loose, sort of circling style of his, then he could be dangerous. But I think he is just a little too loose, and I just think there are gaps in him, his makeup, and in his defenses. And I think you also add into the mix Troy Williamson. I think belatedly he's just found his right weight, hasn't he? I mean, that's 2 fights up at super middle, and he was tremendous against Mark Dickinson, albeit an English stroke British title level fighter. But the same again, he was tremendous against Simpson. It's 2 fights up at 168. He's been tremendous in both of those. So yeah, I'd be with Williamson myself. What about over in Dublin, Callum Walsh against Tyler Denny? Because you hinted at it last week that Callum Walsh is, unbeaten. He's getting the treatment. He's getting the build-up. He's getting the backing. And what tends to go along with all of that, Matt, as you and our regulars all know, when you get the build-up, the backing, the treatment, and the future is dangled in front of you, you also get the matchmaking. And he has had plenty of that so far as well. It might be timing is perfect for him with Tyler Denny. It might well be. He's got fast hands, hasn't he, Callum Walsh? But he's also got vulnerabilities. I think if Denny turns up in the same kind of form that he did against Lidard, not only did I think he's got a chance at 9-2, I'd go as far as to pick him to win it. But that's the if. That's the if.
I think I understand why they're going big on Callum Walsh, the Irishman who spent so much of his time out in America, building a fan base out there. I think he will be exceptionally determined to show everyone what he's been learning while he's been away at the weekend. And Tyler Denny, as we know, a fellow Rowley Regis-ite. So I've got so much respect for Tyler Denny, not only for surviving his years in Rowley Regis, but for also surviving his years in boxing and getting to a point where he was just, it looked like all of the chances were going to pass him by. And he managed to win all of the domestic titles at middleweight. And he'll be a test for Callum Walsh, but I would expect Callum Walsh to win this one on points.
I think you're probably right. It's one of those. I give Denny a right chance. I think he can win. I suspect Callum Walsh probably will. What about Adam McKenna? He's been out for some time, hasn't he? He's been out for 16 months since he produced a career best against Liam Smith. He surprised me that night. I've got to say, because I thought if Smith still had something left, he wasn't plagued by injury, I thought Smith would beat McKenna that night, and McKenna really rose to the occasion. Maybe aided and abetted by what was going on with Smith at the time and the stage of his career. This Etinoso Elia, now fighting out of Italy, although he's boxed half a dozen times in Germany as well. I watched a bit of footage of him, Matt. What do you make of him in the test that he presents to McKenna, and what version of McKenna we're going to see turn up?
I'm not sure what version of McKenna we're going to see. I think it's. I mean, I understand that these are the highest ranked middleweights by the IBF, and the IBF can't rank fighters that are fighting for. Well, they can, but all of them choose not to rank fighters that are fighting for other belts for whatever reason, and therefore you have the most like hard to work out set of rankings, and you very, very hard to justify that. Out of all of the middleweights in the world, the IBF have nominated these two to fight for the World Championship. No disrespect to either of them, but you look at Alia's record, and yes, he's had some fights against kind of fringe European guys, but nothing to suggest really that he deserves a middleweight title shot. And frankly, neither has McKenna. I could know he beat Liam Smith, and he was excellent against Liam Smith. I would expect him to beat Alia, who I've seen on a couple of occasions, and it might go a few rounds. But really, as a world title fight, this is the kind of fight that does bother me, if I'm honest. This is the kind of fight where it's so easy for people to criticise. And this is why people do criticise, because it is easy to do so, and because these things happen kind of all the time. And that's why it's such a shame when we want to be championing things, and there's fights like this that are being seriously justified and it'll be shouted from the rooftops. I suspect it will be shouted from the rooftops that this is for a world middleweight title fight, but it's on a Zuffa card. So it will also be interesting to see how they decide to dress it up, because they've gone a different way, haven't they? We haven't spoke about the revised Ali Act that has gone through. Initially, what was supposed to be, what they wanted to go through, is that the sanctioning bodies wouldn't really be involved. They wouldn't be able to have multiple champions per division. That's all been pushed to the wayside now. So it's essentially almost like a status quo. Everybody's welcome, but now we've also got a Zuffa championship. Thanks very much. Brilliant. Glad you sorted that out.
Yeah. This is a fight. These two fighters, this is one of those. It should be an IBF sort of European or IBF Intercontinental or international title, isn't it? One of those baubles. That's what it is. Not a full world title fight. Absolutely not. He does throw sort of punches in little quick bursts, sort of 1, 2, 3s. Oliha. He lunges in with the right hand, so he does explode in. So I think the thing to look out for is when he makes those little sudden electric rushes, whether McKenna can meet him on the way in, like we saw Chamberlain do with Pierce O'Leary with the first knockdown. So it'll be interesting. I think that's where McKenna can hurt him if he is to get a stoppage, when Oliha explodes into those moments. And he does make mistakes with those little quick explosions. So look out for that. He throws little bursts, tries to explode into the right hand. He'll be vulnerable in those little exchanges. And that's where McKenna can hurt him, if he is to hurt him and stop him. And one final thing that just occurs to me regarding Troy and Callum Simpson is that we know how psychology plays such a big part in boxing, Matt. And those frustrations that Williamson, not getting his world title opportunity, maybe not getting the credit that he feels he deserves, but more about the opportunity. And at his age, at the age of 34, having to wait and wait, if things aren't necessarily going his way, how much of that deep frustration turns into resentment, turns into disappointment in performance. It's just another thing that occurs to me, that possibly that could weave its way in.
Yeah, it's a worthwhile point as well. There's several fighters that will be kind of feeling that as well, and that could fall foul to that in fights. We have seen a lot of discontentment from boxers in the past year. And just something before we move on, we haven't mentioned Lee Reeves.
No.
We haven't mentioned Lee Reeves, and Lee Reeves was involved in a hellacious fight at the weekend in Dublin, and was eventually knocked out against Gary Cully, and remains, as far as I'm aware, in critical condition in hospital, in a stable condition. To me, it's a really sad story. There's interviews with Lee Reeves before the fight, in the build up to the fight, saying that he essentially kept gambling on himself because he wanted to get in a fight where people could see what he was all about. He was completely reliant on his sponsors. Said he hadn't really been earning a lot of money throughout his career to this point, but he was he welcomed the chance to fight Gary Cully. In the end, he was exhausted. He'd never been past 8 rounds before. And he was right in that fight with the far more accomplished and experienced Gary Cully until he got knocked out in the 10th round. There is a GoFundMe page out there that has been set up that you should be able to find without any difficulty, because I think there is real concerns now that he's going to need a lot of medical attention.
Yeah, critical but stable was the last we heard. Little information coming out at the start of this new week, but yeah, absolutely. And I meant to mention that in and amongst the Pierce O'Leary Mark Chamberlain fight, which was brutal and hard and bloody, and it just reminds you, as we said, we're in wonder at what they put themselves through, but there can, thankfully, very rarely, but there can be another side to that, a damaging, hurtful side to that, and unfortunately, we did see that at the weekend. Yeah, let's just fingers crossed that he is as well as he can be. And finally, the weekend, Chanika Johnson against Dina Torsland. Matt, that's a cracker, actually. Stylistically, that's a real cracker. You look at Torsland's sort of record and you think she's going to be all about boxing and boxer, but she likes to steam forward almost as much as Chanika Johnson. The bookies almost have it as a pick-em that. I think it'll be tough for Torsland to beat Johnson at her own game. She is demonstrably tough and aggressive, but she can occasionally just take a little millimeter step back before she goes again. If she can buy herself a tiny bit of space, then Torsland's got a chance of winning that. She's got a chance anyway in what I think will be a firefight, but she doesn't move her head much. I would be amazed if there's not cuts in this one, Matt. In fact, if I could have a bet for the weekend, it'd be cuts somewhere, Chanika Johnson against Dina Torsland, because I think that'll be bloody. I think it'll be a real battle.
There you go. There's your bet. Request a bet. Cuts in that fight.
Time now for this week. And this week, we take you back to the 29th of July, 1994, at the newly minted MGM Grand, Matthew, where you and I have both been. At that stage of its career, just formative days of the MGM. So there were 9,000 set up and packed in. Of course, it would become a sort of 17,000 arena. And really interesting is Oscar De La Hoya and Jorge Páez, the experienced Jorge Páez, would fight for the vacant lightweight title for the WBO. Oscar, who'd been a long-standing super featherweight champion. But there's some really interesting sort of dynamics at play here, Matt, isn't it? Oscar trying to convince the skeptics. Oscar trying to win over the fans. Oscar, who'd been down twice in the first round in 2 of his last 3 fights, trying to essentially prove his manhood, the Mexican nature of his upbringing, his boxing heritage, was always at play in the early stages of his career. Perhaps it was always at play even throughout his career. And it's very much quite a bit at the heart of this one.
I think you're right. I think it kind of was at play throughout his career. I think, as with many fighters, you don't really appreciate them until you've got some distance between the end of their career. And then you can go back and you can look at how they performed and you can think about how they perform today. And you can perhaps say, well, they would have done well in most eras. But at the time, it's always very, very difficult almost for the human race to universally get behind someone and give them a pat on the back. And De La Hoya was, we can say now, an incredible fighter. Yes, he lost the odd fight, but don't tell me he lost all of his biggest fights. Don't come at me with that argument. But he himself felt it going into this fight. Before we recorded today, I looked at the first Oscar De La Hoya autobiography, which it's not the most revealing, in all honesty, but there's a few little interesting bits. And what he said about Jorge Páez was that Jorge Páez was a Mexican darling, and that he still felt like he was a bit of an imposter and De La Hoya himself felt as a bit of an imposter as a Mexican American. He was expecting to get the cheers as he walked into the MGM Grand, but he could sense that there's a fair number of people in there that wanted Páez to win. And these were his words in the book. He said, Páez was the first opponent I faced who I had watched and admired as a teenager. And it wasn't just me. My whole family loved Páez. Now I was going in against him. So he will have felt all sorts of pressure. It's very much a coming of age exercise for De La Hoya. And I think even though he'd beaten Jimmy Bradle to win the WBO super featherweight title, I think that on paper, Páez would have been regarded as the most accomplished fighter he'd fought up until that point. 53, 6-4 going in. Only 28 years old, but had all the hallmarks of a grizzled veteran, Jorge Páez. Ridiculous haircut, yet again. Wouldn't get away with that mayhem now on your head. But what is striking from the opening bell is how much bigger De La Hoya looks than Jorge Páez,
who'd been a featherweight champion. De La Hoya moving up from super featherweight, and this was the 64th fight of Páez's career, only at the age of 28, a very youthful, fresh-faced, baby-faced 21-year-old Oscar De La Hoya, who was 13-0 at this stage with 12 knockouts. He'd been a fairly long-standing champion at super featherweight and moving up. And that haircut that Matt refers to, used to seeing a sort of ponytailed, but often things shaved into the hair of Páez throughout his career, sometimes bleached as well. This time it was a political message. He hadn't had it done during the sort of pre-fight press conferences in fight week, but on fight night, as he made his way to a ring in a sort of cross between a sort of Santa Claus and a Mexican cape, wasn't it, in terms of those colours and the gaud of it. And he had a baseball cap on, but when he takes the cap off, you can just see a name shaved into the back of his head, and it says Zedillo. And that refers to Ernesto Zedillo, who was a new candidate for the PRE party, the Workers' Industrial Party. And he would become the latest president of Mexico subsequent to this fight. And Páez was advertising Ernesto Zedillo and his name and his candidacy. Páez lending it some ballast, some authenticity, some support among the workers and the boxing fans on this very night. But he would be humbled, maybe a little embarrassed looking at Páez's reaction after a cagey first round. De La Hoya clips him with a left hook and then hits him with another one, and down goes Páez, and that's that.
Yeah, the first round is relatively level. I think you'd probably perhaps just give it to De La Hoya, but there's no, essentially what I'm saying is there's no clue that Páez is about to capitulate in the second round. And you watch it now, and you do I hate as someone who is not a boxer to say things like this, but you do watch it now and you do think, why didn't you get up? But it is a rapid fire combination. You said there's a left hook come uppercut that seems to start it. It's a whiz bang of a shot, and that lit the fuse in De La Hoya, and all of a sudden there's an explosion from De La Hoya. Both fists going in that people that are familiar with De La Hoya will have seen countless times in countless fights. And it initially looks like it's a right hand that kind of does the damage to Páez, or does the definitive damage. I think a right actually clips him and the left uppercut comes in, and it's all she wrote. But Páez you sense he's conscious. You sense he's one of those where you kind of think back to Jack Johnson versus Jess Willard and things like that, kind of where the hands are on the body, the blinking that you can see, and you think he's all right. And then it all seems to kind of hit him post-fight. He's just got his head in his hands for minutes afterwards, just the disappointment. And it's not like Páez was known for anything like that. I think it's only the second time in his career he'd been stopped. It would have been a huge opportunity for him. Only he will know how he felt at that moment. And then we get to hear from fresh-faced Oscar De La Hoya. And I must admit, De La Hoya should be the most interesting study into the character arc of people that have spent too long in this business. He was so polite in this post-fight interview. He was so thoughtful with what he was going to say, and almost shy. And all I could think about was his clapback now. Yeah. And I just thought the guy has completely changed. And this is what I said to Nick Bond, the designer at Boxing News, a longtime colleague who used to idolize Oscar De La Hoya. when I used to go out to Las Vegas for the fights, and I'd be interviewing De La Hoya as a promoter. And I said, it very quickly becomes really hard to remember him as a fighter when he's got his promoter's hat on. And it is two completely different characters. I was looking around for an old KO magazine that I found a few weeks ago. I can't remember what I've done with it, but there's a big, massive, in-depth interview with Oscar De La Hoya at this point of his career, where he's talking about being in nightclubs and finding them repulsive, finding the whole idea that people would drink and take drugs to kind of alter their mind, just something that he cannot understand and he will never do. But he kind of scaled that mountaintop in boxing, and he was forced into this world that was alien to him initially. And I don't think in the end he did what he did to cope while he was in it. He still does what he needs to do to cope. But the De La Hoya around this time, when he was fighting Jorge Páez, to the De La Hoya now, who is the promoter of people like Zepeda and Ryan Garcia, are like two completely different people.
Well, even the De La Hoya sort of up to Mayweather, in truth, and all the way through in between, Matt. I think in boxing, certainly modern day, in boxing, I think without doubt he's the best loser I think the sport has ever had. I don't think there's been anyone who's been a better loser than De La Hoya. Now, in the early stages, I think in this part of his career, that's partly to do with image. It's partly to do with sponsors, and I suppose a bit of age in the early stages of his career, not wanting to tread on toes, not wanting to say the wrong thing, not wanting to alienate either fans or would-be paymasters. I think there's a lot of that at play, with particularly the early stages of his career. But you watch all the fights that De La Hoya lost, controversially or not. The Mosley, even the Mayweather. There's a big smile, there's a shrug of the shoulders, there's I thought I did enough, but he was a tremendous sportsman and a tremendous sport, De La Hoya, all the way throughout his career. Now, that's at odds with what you see now, as Matt says, but he was an outstanding sport.
He was. And you can also kind of make arguments that he was fortunate in some of his 12-round fights to get the decision himself. I think the Ike Corte one is the first that comes to mind. But he would, again, he'd lose a fight. He wouldn't then spend the next 3 years sulking about it. He would rebuild. And people would be surprised that when you do go back and you look at kind of the pound-for-pound list in the 1990s, there are consecutive years where De La Hoya is number one. People kind of fixate on the losses, the way that he kind of took his foot off the gas against Felix Trinidad, for example. Then the first defeat to Shane Mosley, he was unlucky for my money in the second fight against Shane Mosley. He was fortunate against Felix Sturm. Then did he see out the count against Bernard Hopkins? But he was without doubt, if you take his career as a whole, and you look at his achievements and you look at where he was regarded amongst the best pound-for-pound fighters of that period, kind of the late 90s going into the early 2000s, a period of about 10 years, there was him, Roy Jones, maybe one of the heavyweights, and they were the most consistent fighters in the sport of boxing.
And just in the interest of balance, in case anyone's shouting at their laptop or the car or whatever on the run at the skies, he might not have sulked outwardly, but he would switch trainers pretty often, and they would carry the rap.
And this is the thing, and this is again having the conversation with Nick. Is I think on the one hand, I think that's really bad form from a fighter to suggest that the loss wasn't their fault; it was the corner's fault. It was the trainer's fault. I do think that's really bad form. I'm not Oscar De La Hoya's number one fan by any stretch. But then you can say, well, perhaps that was to De La Hoya's detriment, in that if he'd have stayed with one trainer all the way through, perhaps he'd have had a more successful career a la Sugar Ray Leonard. But then is he doing what Caroline Dubois wants to do, what Joshua believes he's doing, is that by going to lots of different trainers, you have lots of different guidebooks from which to draw your information, and therefore you're a more complete fighter than if you'd just been listening or reading one. So I don't know, but I mean, to me, the De La Hoya career from the early days before he won Olympic gold, through to him being on top of the world in the pound for pound list, through to the controversial decisions, to the sad end against Manny Pacquiao, to the battles with alcohol and substances, into becoming one of the most successful promoters in the world. And he's now one of the few that will quite happily take shots at Turki Al Sheikh. It is a fascinating character study. It could be the most glorious Netflix series we've ever seen.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And interestingly, ironic, Matt, that there's discussion now about where his career is going. There's discussion about his chin, really. The fact that he's gone down early twice in his last 3 fights. How ironic, because the fortitude of De La Hoya, his strength of character, but also physically as well, and his chin was the thing that would stand the test of time. His body maybe gave up against Hopkins. Literally, his body and weight making cost him against Pacquiao, but really, his body and his chin almost always held up.
And it did, yeah. I mean, you see that sometimes with fighters that are on the way up and they will suffer the odd knockdown, and very often it's a loss of balance, it's an over-eagerness, it's a premature launch forward, and they'll get clipped and they will go down. I think really you should only be concerned as if their legs have gone there, really. But if it is, with De La Hoya, it's very much flash knockdowns. And yes, it didn't take long for that concern to go away. With certain fighters, it sticks with them for their entire career. Like Joshua, with what he suffered against Dillian White, for example, in 2015. People now are still kind of banging on and on about Joshua's chin, and he's never had a chin in his entire career. But with De La Hoya, that wasn't a label that stuck around for very long.
Final word on Oscar against Páez. At the start, there's a really good piece in the HBO broadcast between Larry Merchant and Jim Lampley, and they're talking about, you know, how De La Hoya as Barcelona 92 Olympic gold medalist was considered the future of boxing. Now, given the knockdowns in recent fights, there was an element of doubt about where he'd end up and what his future looked like. He's probably more a Mark Breland or a Howard Davis than a Sugar Ray Leonard or a Purnell, says Lampley and our man. He was more than Breland or Davis, wasn't he? How close did he get, or where did he fit in with Leonard and Purnell?
I think you could make a case that he's, if you take his career as a whole, the fighters that he fought, I think you could make a case that De La Hoya would be above Pernell Whitaker, given that De La Hoya beat Pernell Whitaker. Again, though, that was a contentious one. Some believe that Whitaker had done enough. Most certainly didn't come in Whitaker's peak, but it was still a very, very tricky and good and savvy Pernell Whitaker that De La Hoya managed to outpoint. But I think that I'd probably have him above Whitaker. As I've said it now, I'm kind of doubting myself. I don't know. But De La Hoya, without question, is an all-time great fighter. He went on and did that. You can't say the same about Howard Davis and Mark Breland. And isn't it funny that when they're coming to that conclusion, De La Hoya had 13 professional fights, hadn't really fought anyone. So how could they possibly know at that point? Again, lesson to everybody. We're very quick in boxing to draw our own conclusions. Very quick to kind of be critical or to hang a hat on too many things that really we shouldn't be. We should just let them go along at the pace that they're going at. And I think even though De La Hoya did struggle in some of his bigger fights, what he achieved over the course of his career, I think you could say is a top 20 of all time. And that's a heck of an achievement.
Yeah, not as good as Leonard, but may have squeaked past Purnell. I think that's a fair assessment. Good piece that from Larry Merchant, and an interesting quote. And you know, Oscar at this stage is 13-0. He'd already be beyond Darren McKenna. Let's be frank about that already.
Well, he would. Yeah, he would. And also, I think another thing that's important to mention at this point is that in America, people were not recognising the WBO title. So none of the publications which carried far more influence than they do now. So the Ring wasn't recognising WBO. KO wouldn't be. I think Boxing News was referencing it. But at this point, so Jorge Páez at the end of this fight is not going to suddenly be declared a two-weight belt holder or a two-weight world champion. And if he had, nobody would have taken it seriously at this point in time.
Good point. Final word, James Toney on this bill. James Toney against Charles Williams, who was moving down from light heavy. Toney boxing for the IBF middleweight title, the same title that Adam McKenna is going to box for this weekend. That ties in. Sparkling performance from Toney, weathering the aggression from the bigger man. Williams gives it a lash, doesn't he, through most of the fight. And then just down the stretch, a little bit of the steam going out of the attacks. And that gives the crafty Toney a little bit more license to punch back, a little bit more leeway. And suddenly in this sort of 11th and then 12th rounds, it's Toney who's able to push back Williams. And when he's able to do that, he's able to find the slots and a pretty spectacular classic finish.
Never has James Toney's nickname been more apt with the shot. James lights out Toney, and goodness me, it's like he has just completely short-circuited Prince Charles Williams with the way that he goes down. There's a really famous fight, or it's famous in my world, of the way that Prince Charles Williams is falling backwards, his spine is arched, and he is just gone. And Toney at this point, he was irresistible. Irresistible.
I tell you what, actually, if you're Royston Barney-Smith and his team, and you do, if you are going to box as he did in spells against Reece Bellotti, where you're going to fight off the ropes and you're going to try and pick your spots. If you do want to employ that style, or you at least want to have it in your back pocket, this is the fight to watch. And this is the fight to watch how to do it. Absolutely bang on. Isn't it, Matt? Toney's brilliant in this fight. Absolutely brilliant.
Oh, he is. And, you still hear the word throwback with James Toney. He was a throwback in so many ways. Even, now we can look back on his career 30 odd years later and say that, he was a really special fighter in his time. But even at the time, while we were witnessing it, he was the only one that we were comparing to the old crafty fighters like the Ezard Charles, the Jersey Joe Walcotts, the Archie Moores of the 1950s. He really was someone who admired and was influenced by some of the pioneers of the modern game. Tremendous fighter. Just wish he could have retained the focus behind the scenes, James Toney. But if he had, it wouldn't be the James Toney story. But on his night, James Toney, what a fighter, and he was on his night against Prince Charles Williams.
So go and watch that, topping the Oscar De La Hoya Jorge Páez bill at the newly minted MGM in 1994. Thanks for your support. Keep listening. Tell your friends. Follow us in the socials. Follow us on the socials at the very least if you can't subscribe to Patreon or Apple Plus. And we will meet up again same time next week. Bye for now.